With a lot of the male weightlifters I worked with in the past, it was like I would have to convince them to do something. Like they were doing me a favor completing their workout or something. Whereas with women, it's almost like I have to physically peel them off a barbell so they don't actually kill themselves.
That's Greg Everett. He's the owner of Catalyst Athletics, the world's largest online resource for Olympic weightlifting education, coach of over 40 national and international level lifters, and author of Olympic Weightlifting, a complete guide for athletes and coaches. In this episode, we discuss why you can have a great training cycle and not see the results that you wanted.
You have to be able to recognize the difference between having an ability and testing an ability, because they're not the same thing. You can have the best training cycle of your life. Every single metric is indicating that you are improving. Squat numbers are going up, your pulls are feeling lighter, you're feeling more stable overhead. But then on, say, max total day at the end of the cycle or in a competition, you don't do well. Were those related to the training program, or was it related to the day?
He also breaks down two of the biggest mistakes weightlifters make that can hold back your technique for years.
People have a bad tendency to not take their lift seriously until they get to, 85, 90%. When they're taking their 7 warm-up sets, they're just doing whatever. They're not paying attention. Surprisingly enough, their lifts don't look that good. And then they get to those 85, 90% plus lifts and their lifts don't look good. Yeah, because that's what you trained. That's the most obvious one. But I think the one that goes overlooked a lot more often is...
Welcome back to the Last Set Best Set podcast. I'm Coach Brian. I'm the owner of Big Ben Strength, and I've been teaching Olympic lifting for 11 years now.
And I'm Coach Calvin, current captain of Lindenwood University's Olympic weightlifting team, as well as a coach through Big Ben Strength.
And today we have a special guest for you guys. We have Greg Everett. He's the owner of Catalyst Athletics, the world's largest resource for Olympic weightlifting education. He's a coach of over 40 national and international level lifters, author of Olympic Weightlifting, a complete guide for athletes and coaches, and Tough, building true mental, physical, and emotional toughness for success and fulfillment, and the writer and director of the documentary American Weightlifting. Greg, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I wanted to go ahead and kick this off and ask you a question about some technique stuff, since we are weightlifters here. One of the most common questions that we get, and I'm sure that you do as well, is how do I fix X lift? In a recent article, you stated that the only way to truly answer this question is to find the limiter. So what do you see as the most common limiters for people in the Olympic lifts? And what are some easy ways for athletes to better identify their own limiters?
Oh, man. I would say based on the 6 trillion videos or so I see a day, probably the most common is a shocking lack of control of where the bar is going right from the start. I don't know. My best hypothesis is that people have assumed or have been taught explicitly that the bar path should be vertical. And that one drives me nuts because I've been trying to clarify that for 20 years. And a lot of people get it. A lot of people just get bad information about that from people who I somehow have never seen an Olympic lift from the side. But so that's my assumption, is that a lot of people are thinking like, well, I need a straight bar path. Well, if the bar starts about over the balls of your foot, which it will in a pretty good, conventional starting position, that means by the time that bar is up at your hips, it's way far in front of you. And that means your body has to chase it forward. And so that's why you see people really reaching their hips forward and not continuing to push with their legs. You see them jumping forward into the bar and, God, I don't know why I'm so unstable overhead. I do. You jumped 6 inches forward and you created a bunch of momentum and you're not directly under the bar. So it's like a triple whammy instability issue. So that would be the number one thing is people not putting the time and effort and focus into the absolute most fundamental pieces, which are your basic starting and finishing positions and your balance and your control of the bar proximity to your body.
And so there was an email that you sent out a while back that I favorited and read a couple times about how you do anything is how you do everything. So people have all these technique issues, and this frustrates the hell out of me when they ask me this, like, how do I stop doing this? I'm like, well, first off, like, have you tried stopping doing that? You know, and you broke it down really well in there about the idea that, like, you guys have to have some idea, like have some ownership over how you do these lifts, not just when it starts to get heavy and you notice the problem, right? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I would break that into two pieces. Is first of all, people have a bad tendency to not take their lift seriously until they get to, 85, 90%. So when they're taking their 7 warm-up sets or whatever it is, they're just doing whatever. They're not paying attention. They're, chit-chatting with their friends. And, surprisingly enough, their lifts don't look that good. And then they get to those 85, 90% plus lifts, and their lifts don't look good. And it's like, well, that's because that's what you've been practicing every day. That's, 80% of your training volume you are doing at these lighter weights and not taking it seriously. So that's the most obvious one. But I think the one that goes overlooked a lot more often is all the supplemental work. So, pull and deadlift variations, things like push presses or jerk variations. People just absolutely do not pay attention to what they're doing or how they're doing it. So like the big one with jerks is people do push presses and it's like they're bouncing the weight off the ceiling. They don't even lock it out completely. They sure don't hold it up there forcefully and train that really forceful, controlled, perfect lockout position. And then, oh God, coach, I don't know why, I my elbows rebound at the top of all my jerks. Yeah, because that's what you trained. That is what you are training yourself to do with those million other reps that you're not paying attention to. And, stuff like pulls, same thing. People, pulling with their, shifting their weight way back to their heels or tipping over the bar or, like I said earlier, leaving the bar forward and then just reaching their hips to it, not continuing to push into the floor all the way. So they just kind of flop back down to their heels, swinging the bar away. I talk to Amy about this probably 3 times a week doing check-ins. Like, why do people do this when they do pulls? I don't understand like how you don't feel that, right? Like the kind of the stiff arm swing off the hips. Like you have to know that you don't want to do that when you snatch, because in your next video you're telling me, hey, I'm swinging my snatch away. How do I fix it? Well, that's step 1 is don't practice swinging the bar away when you do snatch pulls, right? So it's those two things that people just have to pay attention. Like you really have to understand that every single rep you do, whether it's an actual snatch, clean, or jerk, or if it's a pull, press, push, press, whatever, all of that stuff is affecting how you execute those competition lifts at your max weights. So the more seriously you take all those other things, the better it works and the more effective your actual competition lifts are.
What people will probably be surprised by when they try and be a little bit more intentional, like if you spend most of your training not being intentional like this, you're going to be surprised when you try and do this, how hard it actually is. Like how hard it is to actually be locked in for every set of an exercise that you do. I think a lot of people will be very surprised by that and how hard it actually takes. Like it's almost a skill that you have to develop along with all the other techniques and the training that you do.
100% is, right? That's you are building that skill for, say, competition. How do you stay focused and present and engaged for a 2-hour long session when you're only doing 6 lifts that take, 20 seconds combined? That is absolutely a skill, and very few people have it well developed.
I was really struggling with my jerk a lot when I like in my early weightlifting days. Still am probably, but
Same.
something that I dealt with a lot was my hips coming forward in my dip, and I feel like I made the most progress when I started approaching literally every time I would unrack the bar in a front rack. I started realizing, oh, I'm going to do a strict press. Well, I'm unracking it with my hips forward. Okay, I'm catching a power clean. Well, I'm catching it with my hips forward. Like I'm taking a front squat off. Well, my hips are already forward because that's where I'm comfortable. So I have to change that in every single front rack movement I'm doing if I want to get better in the jerk. I can't just lazily unrack the strict press, and it's a strict press, but still, like,
Very few people have that revelation that early on. Usually you get to my age and you're like, wow, I wasted my entire weightlifting career for the last 30 years training like an idiot.
Speaking of, what are some other things that you find people do that waste their entire training career, that are some obvious ones to you now, but maybe aren't obvious to kids that are 16 or 17 and getting into weightlifting?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of the classic bouncing around between training programs and like completely different styles of training, and never really committing to something long enough to truly see the accumulating results. But kind of related to that on a smaller scale is not committing to certain exercises long enough to really derive the result that you could. So another one I get all the time is like, well, I tried this technique exercise you suggested and it didn't work. Well, like, what do you mean you tried it? Well, yeah, I tried it in my session yesterday and it didn't really make my clean better. It's like, you tried it one time and you're telling me it doesn't work. Like, that's insane. That is an insane perspective on how this stuff is supposed to work. It's not a magic spell. Like, it's skill training. And it's mental training to a large degree too. Like, it's both those things combined, and you have to put in the time and the reps with, focused and intentional training, as you said, over a significant period of time. Now, with some things, you're going to have noticeable results right away. Like, let's say you do some tall cleans before your cleans, and you're like, oh, I understand better what my arms should be doing on my way under the bar. And you can feel that happening right away in your cleans. But you have habits. You've spent God knows how many years and how many reps training this bad habit. It's not going to suddenly be overwritten by this new thing you practiced 15 times today. So those are the big things. And so people like suddenly exhaust all of the possible technique exercises out there in 4 weeks. And they'll just keep doing that over and over. They kind of just recycle these things over and over and keep looking for magic solutions, when had they just committed to something that has been proven to work well for other people for many years, they would have actually gotten the results they spend all their time on TikTok looking for.
One thing that you brought up there was about spending more time with a certain exercise to get good at it. We see, I came from a bit of a CrossFit background. And so they are very much all over the place with the exercise selection. They wonder why they can't get better at specific exercises because they just don't do them. But then in weightlifting, it's a little bit different, right? We have kind of the same, call it 12 exercises that we do all the time and need to get better at. And then even similarly with the accessory work, like, there's really only so many things that people need to do to get better at weightlifting. How long do you think an athlete should plan to stick with an exercise to see the results of that?
I don't know that I have a good, perfectly objective answer, but I mean, just off the cuff, like, it's probably got to be at least 4 weeks or something. Like, you think about a typical exercise, you're maybe only going to do it once or twice a week. Mm-hmm. If you're doing more of a technique thing where you're throwing it in as kind of like a primer multiple times a week, obviously you're going to get more exposure than that. But I mean, if you're not getting at least 10, 12 times running through multiple sets of it, I wouldn't even start trying to evaluate, whether or not it's actually effective for you, because there's a learning curve. Like, okay, I'm going to do tall snatches or whatever. Well, you're not even doing the tall snatch correctly those first 3 sessions. You're doing like a dip snatch or a hip snatch or some kind of like bouncing, weird, swinging, kettlebell swing under the bar kind of thing. So you can't even count those as exposure to the exercise because you haven't done the exercise yet. So I think it's less objectively speaking. It's more looking at, once you have practiced enough that you are executing the exercise accurately enough for it to do what it's supposed to do, now you start counting exposures, and how many times that's going to be. Well, we've all seen it. There's one person who walks in the gym and learns how to snatch and clean and jerk in 3 minutes flat, and they look pretty good. There's someone else who's doing that for 13 years, and you're like, keep working on it. Like you're gonna get there. So you can't really assign like a hard number to it, I don't think.
That's very true. I mean, like the first part of it is just you have to learn how to do the exercise before you can even really get the benefits of the exercise, and sometimes that learning process takes a while. Another thing that you mentioned just a couple seconds ago was, bouncing around from program to program and not sticking with anything long enough to get the results. An interesting problem that I see on the other side of that is not knowing when to say something's not working.
Yeah.
Like how do you, if you give something enough time to where it should work, how do you know when it's time to call it quits on an approach?
That's a good question, and it's hard to answer. I think I honestly have struggled to answer that more than once as a lifter myself, as a coach. And there's definitely times when you're like, God, this program, like I know this program works, and it's not working for this person, but like there's got to be something I can do to change it. And I think a big part of the issue too is that there are so many factors involved in determining whether or not you get the end result you expect from a program. Like, I mean, 2025 was just a brutal year for me as a coach because it seemed like every single athlete I had suddenly had injuries. They were getting like crazy illnesses. They were having, problems with job stuff that they weren't able to train. Like it was just one thing after another, like what is going on? And so that completely prevents you from evaluating a program as a program, right? At that point, you're just kind of like doing whatever you can to keep them training. So that's number one, is you have to actually be able to get through a training cycle with relatively few disruptions to evaluate it properly. For the most part, there's other times when you're like within 3 weeks, you're like, this is a terrible program. Like this person is either dying, like I'm killing this person with this program, it's way too much, or it's whatever, it's way too frequent. Or the opposite might be true, where it's like you're not even creating enough stimulation for that athlete for them to get anywhere. So I think when it's really obvious, it's obvious quickly. But I would say that, it'd say like an 8 to 12 week training cycle would be fairly typical for your audience. And if you run a cycle like that one time, and let's say maybe you just PR your snatch a tiny bit, but your clean and jerk doesn't get any better, or like your squat doesn't get any better, you have to kind of start looking at other metrics. Like, okay, were my did my other lifts get stronger? Did they get better measurably, or at least observably? Do I feel like this is progressing me in the right way? And maybe I just didn't. I need to do this a little bit longer to have that actually transfer into snatch and clean and jerk. Or was my testing day a problem? Did I not sleep all night before my one testing day? And that's a big thing too, is that you have to be able to recognize the difference between having an ability and testing an ability, because they're not the same thing. So, for example, you can have the best training cycle of your life, and every single metric is indicating that you are improving, right? Your squat numbers are going up, your pulls are feeling lighter, you're feeling more stable overhead, all these supplemental exercises are getting better, whatever. But then on, say, max total day at the end of the cycle or in a competition, you don't do well, or you even bomb out. But look at all the other factors that play into that. Were those related to the training program, or was it related to the day or the day before? Or was it something like the whole training program is great, but that last taper week was inappropriate for you and didn't work the way, and you just have to change that rather than throwing the entire program away and starting fresh? So I guess what I'm saying is there's so many pieces to it that it gets really difficult to sift through all that and figure out what part of it is a problem, what part of it is good. And so with regard to changing programs, I think it's typically more appropriate, if you do need to change programs, is make relatively minor changes. don't completely reinvent the wheel every 12 weeks, because then it's like you're just getting overwhelmed with data that you have no frame of reference for. Like you can't understand what it's telling you. Whereas if you have a 12-week program, you're like, it didn't work quite as well, but I think really what I need to do is maybe reduce the squat volume a little bit, or maybe the pulls were too heavy for this athlete, but overall the structure is working well. So you make adjustments like that, and then you reevaluate.
Tired of programming that doesn't work? Inconsistent technique, missing lifts, or going months without PRs is all signs that your program isn't working. If this is you, I'd like you to consider joining the OlyStrong team, my online weightlifting program available in 3, 4, and 5 days a week for weightlifters looking to dial in their technique, get strong, and most importantly, set PRs. Each week is structured to support the things all weightlifters need. Enough practice in the snatch and clean and jerk to dial in your technique, a consistent strength program to build big squats, pulls, and presses, and accessory work carefully chosen to build muscle that supports your Olympic lifts. The program uses logical progressions that focus on building momentum each week instead of just maxing out every week, or worse, only lifting light to work on your technique. If this sounds like something you need, then scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below for a free week trial today. All right, back to the show.
Hey, here's an interesting question. Like to the tune of sticking with a program long term. This is something that kind of comes to mind, especially being in the university lifting kind of arena. For like say like a 4-year progression. Most coaches, can talk about a macro cycle, like, okay, what happens over the course of a year? Okay, volume decreases, intensity goes up, kind of thing, whatever. Different phases in a year. What do different years of a training cycle string together look like from, say, a pretty new weightlifter in year 1 to a more advanced weightlifter in year 4? What kind of programming things happen? What's the differences in this athlete's training?
I mean, real broadly, you're probably going to see an increase in training volume and probably frequency, especially if you're coming in talking about someone who's really new to it, right? Especially if they don't have much of an athletic background. You're probably starting someone off with a relatively low volume, even potentially, lower frequency training program, and kind of building up that capacity and that ability to train harder. Your average intensities of the lifts are probably going to increase quite a bit because, again, early on, you're not technically sound. So even if you say, hey, I want to be able to get X number of lifts between 80 and 90% in, this mesocycle, you can't necessarily do that because that person can't consistently hit those numbers. Or if they do consistently hit what is 80% for them at that time, it's not really 80% because their maxes are not representative of their true physical ability. So I think your volume is going to increase, your average intensity is going to increase. Generally, you're probably going to have a larger percentage of the training volume be directly related to competition lifts rather than more kind of supplemental / accessory type stuff. As they get better and the actual competition lifts become more able to be training exercises rather than kind of skill exercises, right? Like early on, when you're still kind of learning how to snatch and clean and jerk, they're not stimulating the kind of physical changes that they do when you are technically proficient and say your snatch is like a huge percentage of your ability to pull a weight off the floor. Like you see newer lifters and you give them, say, clean pulls at 110%, and it looks like they're not even doing anything. They're like, this is really too easy. You're like, yeah, actually it is too easy. And then, I remember when I was as good of a weightlifter as I got, doing pulls at like 105%. And I'm like, it felt like a max deadlift half the time. So you find the changes like that in percentages and types of things, probably less technical work, and again, more actual work on the competition lifts themselves directly. So you're actually doing snatch, clean, jerk, rather than like all kinds of as many variations of those things to kind of work on building that proficiency. I don't know. I know that's such a vague answer, but I don't know that I can answer it more
Yeah, that's
any
cool.
less vaguely.
It's not a thing I see like a lot of coaches talking about. I guess I feel like a lot of coaches are maybe concerned with getting athletes on for a year or a shorter term or
Yeah.
getting them lined up now. But that's definitely a part that I'm super interested in is that long term progression. And since I kind of mentioned it right now too, it's not something I've ever heard you talk about, but it's something that's really close to my heart is the college weightlifting kind of thing. And it's something I feel like has a lot of potential. But I just wanted to ask you like what you think on that. They moved it to be sort of its own meet with Masters Nationals now. What do you think the potential of that is, or should USA Weightlifting invest more, or what's the right direction to take it?
Man, I don't know. It's so tricky because you it's hard enough getting an athlete and then retaining an athlete long enough to really help them progress as much as possible. In a collegiate setting, you can really go either way with that. Like you could have that athlete for 4 or 5 years. You could have them for 6 months. So it's really difficult to know. Even as the coach or an administrator in a collegiate weightlifting program, it's very difficult to know how much you can invest in each athlete as they come into the program, and therefore where to start and how to progress. So, like you said, most coaches are like, I got to get this athlete as good as possible right now because who knows how long they're going to be around and if I'm even going to have them anymore. And if I say, hey, your first 2 years here are going to be very much on the developmental end, so that by the time you're 26, you're going to be absolutely the best you can possibly be. A lot of them are probably not going to want to do that because if they're a collegiate coach and you're 26, you're not in their program anymore and they don't get the credit. So I think that's part of the issue, is coaches kind of wanting to do as much as they can in the time they believe they're going to have with that athlete. And unfortunately, even if not even an ego issue, but the way that the coaching credentialing is set up with USA Weightlifting and most federations, like they have to be that coach at the time to get credit for something, even if they're the ones who say put 80 kilos on this kid's total. And then 6 months later, they're with another coach and put 2 kilos on and make a world team, right? I've had that happen to me. And you don't get the credit, even though you did 99% of the work. You did all the hardest part. So I think that's a big issue with it. As far as what USA Weightlifting needs to be invested in, the reason I don't work for USA Weightlifting is because I don't want to have to answer those questions. They're really hard questions. And I don't know that there's a perfect answer. The perfect answer really is having, basically a state-run program that handles everything from talent ID at a very young age to all the retention and incentivization, post-career support, all those things, like country like China. That is how you consistently produce the best weightlifters. However, no one here wants to do that. And I agree. I wouldn't want to work within a program like that either. I wouldn't want to be an athlete within a program like that. But if you are looking at strictly athletic performance, that is the best way to do it, to reliably produce great athletes. So in the US, you'll see like we have some absolutely phenomenal weightlifters. Someone like Olivia Reeves. She's just destroying everybody around the world, and she's not from a program like that, right? She's been training with Steve Fowler since she was very young, and he's done an incredible job. She's a remarkably talented athlete. But with USA Weightlifting, we kind of rely on those just getting lucky, right? So someone like Olivia Reeves walks through your door one day. Someone like Kendrick Ferris walks into your door one day. We're not going out and finding those people and actively channeling them into sports that they are built for to be great at, versus something like a Chinese or like a North Korean program where you really don't have a choice. they can consistently get athletes of that caliber and have them 10 deep in every weight class. 10 deep, just breaking world records on a random Tuesday in April. And like having so many at that level that you don't even know their names because they don't need them. Those are just like, that's like the 8th string, 69 kilo lifter in China or whatever. And they're crushing everybody else. But again, what are the trade-offs? Do you actually want to work and lift in a program like that? Or do you want to have this kind of nebulous, totally chaotic, unreliable system where the best athletes in the country may or may not be getting a stipend at any given point? Who fucking knows? They have to pay their own way to get to the world championships. Things like that. Their coaches aren't covered anymore. And so I would say at bare minimum, USA Weightlifting needs to be financially supporting those top lifters enough that they can make lifting their priority. They're not working 2 jobs just to be able to represent USA Weightlifting. And I don't want to get into all the ins and outs of it, but there's a lot of questionable stuff going on, as there has been historically, although we've had a break for a while from it, with regard to where money is going. And I try to stay out of it because I have enough things that make me want to pull my hair out at this point in life. But I don't even remember what the original question was. I hope that sort of answered it.
Close enough.
I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because I'll just end up seeming like even more of an asshole.
That's something that I think I've heard a few times is people on the internet that I think that they assume that you're I think that they assume
An
that you're a
asshole,
little
you can
meaner
say it.
than you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you meet you in person and you're like, oh, okay. All right. Not an asshole at all.
Yeah. I honestly, I don't, I mean, I guess I kind of know why I developed that reputation, but it still seems strange to me.
It's hard to perfectly portray how you actually are across the internet. I've noticed that. Like, I remember one time I was filming a YouTube video and I had one of my athletes who was like kind of helping me out with some stuff, and he's like, why do you talk like that? Like, you're not like that at all in person. I was like, I guess I hadn't thought about it. I'm like way more like, this is how you do it.
Right.
And in person I'm much more relaxed when I'm coaching an athlete. It's tough to actually get it across the right way,
I've been doing it literally for 20 years at this point, and I still feel like I'm not doing it as well as I could. So yeah.
Speaking of which, like, I feel like you've made books, movies. Apparently, something Brian said he looked at was that you wrote your own score for the American weightlifting documentary. That's what he said.
Some of it, yeah. I think there were 1 or 2 songs that were someone else's, but like all the, I don't know what you call it, atmospheric music or whatever, that was just me.
So
I don't have any money to pay people for music at that point. I didn't even have money for camera equipment, for God's sake.
And then, you got your podcast in the past, you got Instagram and YouTube, of course. What form of media would you say has been like the most rewarding or successful, impactful maybe, to the weightlifting community? Which one wasn't worth it? Which one is worth more investment for you?
I think my big book, the complete guide, that weightlifting book, that has absolutely been the most impactful for the most people. I mean, that first edition came out in 2008. Yeah, that one. That's the 3rd edition. I'm working on the 4th right now, and I've been trying to start working on the 4th edition for about the last 6 years, and I just finally started last year. And it's going to take me forever at this rate because I have to spend all my time making Instagram videos that no one watches. So
I beg to differ because athletes and coaches continue to send them to me. So somebody's watching.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's such a weird situation where I constantly hear, oh, they're so helpful. I send them to everybody. And then I'm like, it's weird that it's really not reflected in the statistics somehow. Like, how are you? Are you all, are 40 of you gathered around one phone watching the video at a time, or like what's going on? Because dipshit McGee over here like is saying absolutely nothing for 30 seconds and getting 1 million views. Anyway, if I hadn't said it before, social media is like absolutely the bane of my existence. Like it has so much potential. It allows me to do so many great things and reach so many people, but it is absolutely the most soul crushing, like depressing thing that has ever happened in human existence, as far as I can tell. At least during my lifetime. I should hedge that a little bit. Anyway, so but the book, the book is really what made my reputation early on. That is what kind of established me as someone that people would listen to. I mean, I guess I had that to an extent first, which is why I was able to put a book out in the first place. But that was kind of like the foundation of like, okay, this guy might know what he's talking about. And then everything else I did, I think, was largely built on that reputation. So I kind of instantly had an existing audience to tap into. So like people were like, oh, how'd you open a weightlifting gym? Like, it wasn't that hard at that time because people already knew who I was, right? It wasn't like you're starting from absolute zero. You're going out to high schools and like trying to get the coaches to talk to you so you can get some of their kids in and, whatever. And so kind of each successive thing I've added to my plate, I have that foundation that has continued to grow. And I think it really started with that book. And I think the big thing too was that book was a good bridge between kind of the coaches that were influential on me and then the next generation, right? Is because I fortunately, like, thank God, kind of got the approval and validation from this older generation of coaches that I respected and I knew. And they could have very much gone the other way and like, who's this kid? Like, he has no business writing a book, which is true. I did not have any business writing a book at that stage. But no one else was doing it to the standard I thought it should be done. But they all were like, yeah, man, this is awesome. And they were very supportive. And I think that really helped too, because that gave me credibility that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And then that helped me kind of almost connect that generation of coaches to the newer generation of coaches and athletes who might not have ever been aware of them. And I was kind of like that bridge between it and got to benefit a lot from that position.
You mentioned some of these older coaches that kind of gave you the approval on this book. I know that you mostly coached with Bob Morris and Mike Bergener. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What were some of the big lessons that you learned from them?
I think the biggest thing, if I have to really simplify it, the biggest thing I got from Bergner was kind of the coach athlete relationship and sort of the atmosphere of a gym or, whatever environment you're training in. And then from Bob, it was more kind of programming side of things. And I think that's not necessarily because that's the only thing either one of them is good at. Part of it too was kind of where I was in my stage of development as an athlete and coach at the times I was working with each of them. But I think that's kind of largely what I took from both of them. And I don't think either one is really more important than the other. But so much of what I know has been derived through experimentation and making mistakes and doing my best to learn from them, rather than like directly working with somebody or someone that people are like, oh, what resources should I go to? I'm like, I don't know, man. That's why I wrote my own books, because I was unhappy with everything that was out there. And so I hate saying that because it makes me sound like such an arrogant prick. But like when I was 15, 16 years old trying to learn how to snatch and clean and jerk, there was nothing out there. There were multiple books, but not a single one taught you, hey, you know nothing. This is how you snatch, clean, and jerk. they didn't exist, which was insane to me. It was you had to like piece it together from multiple sources and just kind of hope you were doing something right, because we had no moving images. It was just, there was like 2 frames in a book, still shots, or I guess in like Artie Dressler's book there were series shots, but you were kind of like, I guess that's kind of what I'm doing. I don't really know. So anyway, again, I didn't sleep enough last night. I'm just talking now. Stop me, please.
That was something that Leo Totten, we interviewed him recently, and he had something similar. He said like a lot of what he was learning this in the 60s.
Yeah,
was about was like we had nothing to go off. We had Strength and Health magazine, and like maybe you knew somebody, and that was really it. And it was like learning from either still pictures or like just reading somebody's snapshot of their program. Like I went through and found a couple of these copies online, and it would just be like, here's Steve Stanko's program for a week. Did he actually do that all the time, or is that just what he told the whoever was asking, or something along those lines? It was very tough to. And now I think that we almost have the opposite problem of not enough information. It's so much information. How do you know what's actually right? And that is the frustrating part of the social media aspect for sure.
Well, it is an overwhelming amount of information, and but like you just kind of alluded to, it's not even so much that it's just an overwhelming amount of information. It's that so much of it is not good information. And if you are brand new to coaching or lifting, you do not have enough education and experience yet to really be able to distinguish between what is good and what is bad, or even what is appropriate and inappropriate. So there can be good information that is totally unsuitable for you at your stage, right? Going back to one of the earlier questions of what's such a big mistake is people trying to train at a more advanced level than they should be, right? Is I learned how to snatch 6 months ago. I'm going to start training like Liu Xiaojun. Like, that's probably not a good idea. And it's the classic thing in all athletics, right? Is people assume, well, if I train like a more advanced athlete, that's the best way to become a more advanced athlete quicker. And it's the exact opposite is true. And so, being able to sort through what's helpful, what's not, what's appropriate, what's not is really difficult. And I feel like I'm out there just like screaming into the void, like, guys, you're killing me. Stop listening to this stuff. It's not a vertical bar path, like whatever the case is. And I see the patterns, right? And every once in a while I'll put out a video addressing something because all of a sudden for 3 months, I've seen a bunch of people doing the exact same thing or saying something. Or it's like, someone is out there telling you this. I don't know who it is because I don't watch other people's social media about weightlifting. But someone's up to no good out there, and it's screwing everybody up. So I'm going to intervene.
The most recent one that I can remember was Wristgate. Just like what's the
Catarist athletics?
Catarist athletics. what's the wrist position for the overhead? And for whatever reason, I was like, why is suddenly every single coach out there talking about this as a topic?
Yeah.
Have you picked up on any reason? Is that just like one person makes a video, then another person makes a video, and then suddenly it's the whole weightlifting zeitgeist? Or
it's the curse of algorithmic platforms, right? Is you get one person who has a good following, they make a video, a ton of people watch it, which means a ton of other people watch it. And then all of a sudden it's like this tidal wave of bad information washing over people who don't know better. And then again, there's a tidal wave coming in and I'm sitting there with like a solo cup trying to like keep the water off the beach from, crushing everybody. And maybe I'm giving myself too much credit, but that's half the time I feel like rather than teaching people stuff, I'm trying to unteach them stuff, right? It's like, no. Like, you need to forget that. Like, this is moving you backward. You need to like start over here and relearn this thing. And so that's the big frustration for me.
I have to believe that a lot of these coaches who are posting content that maybe we don't agree with or is bad information or is just inappropriate for the context aren't doing this maliciously, aren't doing
No.
this out of, they're not certain that they're incorrect in making the post anyway.
No, they're not trying to sabotage everybody.
Right. But like, so what maybe, do you have any advice for these coaches who are like, I want to make stuff that helps people, but I feel like to get the views that it would need to help people, I have to be too general in the way that I talk about this. Do you have any advice as far as that goes for people who are trying to create content, or is it really just like take a step back and like learn it better?
No. I would never tell anyone to like stay off social media. You can't do that. Like if you're trying to run a coaching business, you have to be on social media. That's your sales funnel. Like that's just how it works now. And I wouldn't say being general is inherently a problem. You just have to acknowledge that it is being general, and you have to make that clear with what you're saying. So 90% of the captions of my Instagram videos are like, this is what works overwhelmingly for the most people. Like, but there are exceptions. Here are some exceptions, whatever. Because I want to put those disclaimers out there because I don't want it to come across as saying like, this is the solution for the problem when that's not the case. And so, yeah, can you get more views by being, I don't know, really like severe in what you are prescribing, or, saying it's, this is the right way, this is the one true way, and everything else is stupid? Yeah, you probably can. But that's going to come back to haunt you eventually. And I think
I can say that for sure.
I think we see it happening, although it does happen on a much slower timeline than I would like. In most cases, you're like, God, this guy's going to go away eventually, but it can't happen soon enough. But I think that as long as, all of us were brand new at one point, right? I was a brand new coach. I still feel like a brand new coach half the time. You just have to approach it with that understanding and recognize you don't know everything. I sure don't know everything. There's tons of stuff I don't know or I'm not entirely sure about. And you just have to approach it with that understanding. Like, hey, maybe I shouldn't make a video on this topic because I'm still not totally sure what's best or what's right or what I think about it. Or if I do want to cover this topic because people are interested, maybe I should just make it about the fact that, hey, I'm not quite sure about this, try this. Or maybe, try these two ways and see what works best for you. So I think there are ways to do that where you are acknowledging the fact that you do not have the 100% perfect answer necessarily, because a lot of the times there isn't a 100% perfect answer anyway. And I think that's a mistake I made early on, is even though I knew that, the way I would phrase things made it sound like they were absolutes, because that was just the simplest way rhetorically to get it out there. And I look back on it now, I'm like, oh man, I really shouldn't have said it that way. But at the time, that's what made sense, right? Like using the word must or need. It's like, it's generally more should.
Yeah, the way that I think about that too is like I look back on any of the content that I've made, and the only regret that I have with some of those pieces of content or the updates that I make is usually surrounding the certainty with which I say things.
Yeah,
and that's really it. It's just like, I guess older I get, like at 18 or 19 or 20, it was very much like this is the best way to do things, and now I'm like, who knows? Honestly,
yeah.
Do
Do whatever you want.
That's like one of the biggest things that's held me back from making like more coaching content, is like I don't want to look back and be like, oh, like that was dumb, like I shouldn't have said that, like and it's something
I
that
got
you
bad
never
news
really...
for you, Calvin.
Yeah.
Anytime you publish something, you are going to look back and wish you had done it differently at some point in the future.
There we go.
It's just, if you care about making quality stuff, you're going to feel that way. There's not a single thing I've made in my life. I've been putting books and stuff out since I was like 19 years old. There's not a single thing I wouldn't change. So you have to do the best you can at that time. And like we were just talking about, is try to avoid these absolutes that are going to come back and haunt you later.
Yeah.
You just have to accept the fact that at any given stage, you don't know everything yet, and you're doing the best you can if that is what you're trying to do, instead of just making clickbait nonsense because you want to be a TikTok superstar.
Hey,
That
that was how I got my start, a little bit low key. Then I had to pivot. So
Hobby weightlifters and competitors training might seem the same, but there's one big difference. Competitors need to hit their best lifts on the competition platform. It doesn't matter what you did in training if you can't perform when it counts, and your program should reflect that. Instead of following random programming, maxing out all the time, and hoping for the best on game day, our Competition Strong Team program focuses on long-term progressions that set you up to have your best competition day yet. Each training cycle is carefully designed around the USA Weightlifting National Circuit, so you'll hit your biggest lifts at the Arnold, the American Open Series 2, and of course, the National Championships. If you're ready to take your training to the next level and get platform ready, then click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen for a free week trial today. All right, back to the show. I wanted to ask you, speaking of like going back and updating content and stuff, like you're working on the 4th edition of the book. What do you feel like you need to update in there? I'm curious to know, because I thought it was a pretty comprehensive, but obviously it's 3rd book, you know?
It's comprehensive. It's like 250,000 words. That's not, well, I shouldn't say that. There actually is a bunch of stuff I'm adding. So much of it, though, is that last edition came out in 2016. So that's 10 years ago. You know how much I've learned in 10 years? To think that I wouldn't want to update that stuff is insane. But so much of it is more how I explain things and seeing, okay, well, I explained it this way in this book, and I see a consistent pattern with how people misinterpret what I said, or it's not clear enough. And so learning better ways to do that. I mean, like the best example that comes to mind is just talking about balance over the foot. So, you know, I had a whole diagram, and it was basically like explaining how, you know, really your toes don't really count in the surface area of the foot. So the middle of the foot is actually slightly behind the middle of the foot. And it was this like really overly complex way of trying to describe it. And now I'm just like, be evenly balanced over the whole foot. And so I'm trying to get them to do the same thing, but I'm completely changing the way I'm telling them to do it, because I've learned that the way I was doing it before was not as effective as I thought it would be. And so that's a big part of it. The other big part of it is kind of organizing the information better. Again, 250,000 words, it's a textbook. It's really a slog to get through. So like, for example, in the new edition, I'm pulling all the learning progressions out into its own section right at the beginning of the book. So it's like, hey, I tried to tell you guys to do this in the last edition, like just focus on this stuff now and come back to all the detail later. But now it's like its own little book right at the beginning. Here's how you learn how to snatch, clean, and jerk, you know, squat, brace, all that stuff. Then finish the rest of the book as you kind of accumulate experience and can understand that stuff better. So it's things like that. There's always better ways to do it.
Are you also updating any of the, because I know I've seen you like collecting, it seems like, some data on lift ratios. I'm not sure if it's exactly lift ratios, but lift ratios, it seemed like more so like numbers and weight class stuff, because weight classes have been updated and changed so many times. You know, is that kind of stuff that you're looking at where, you know, I forget if it was your book or if it was Bob DeCano's book, where they were outlining like categorizing experience level of an athlete. Is that something that you're also looking at doing in this?
So I had, going back to I can't remember if it was the 2nd or 3rd edition where I first put it in there, and I had it as an article probably before that. I had like a skill levels chart. And it was basically similar to the old Soviet classification, but I wanted to make one that was a little more, I guess, broad and more appropriate for the audience I was working with, because the Soviet levels were very specific to their program. And so that was all based on actual competition and athlete data. And so, yeah, now this many years later, I have access to a lot more data and I can kind of refine that stuff a bit. Although it's been really reassuring that all this new data that has come in has basically perfectly aligned with what I had out back then. Like nothing, there was nothing where I was like, oh man, I was way off. It was like, no, it's actually shockingly consistent, which is nice to see. So there won't be any crazy changes with that, but it's nice to be able to say like, hey, these numbers are based on, this many thousands of athletes versus my team, or whatever I was using at that time. So I guess it's nice to see that my athletes were all doing what they were supposed to do also.
Yeah, that is nice. It's always nice to look back and go, oh, I actually kind of nailed that pretty well.
Yeah, I wasn't as bad as I thought I was.
One thing that I've been interested in more, so a little bit of context here. My coach was Glenn Penlay, and he was very obsessed with this idea of like trying to find the American weightlifting system. Like I guess he saw the Russian system, he saw the Chinese model, the Bulgarian system.
Yeah.
And he was really interested in, especially towards the end of his life, it seemed like trying to find what that American system is. Is this something that you think about regularly, or is this something that you think is maybe even not worth trying to find?
Well, before I go on, let me preface this by saying I respect Glenn Penley. When he was at Cal Strength, he was right across the San Francisco Bay from us. Like we saw each other regularly, we talked regularly. We were kind of like friendly rivals, even though my team was basically all women and his was all men. But I actually Larry Draper, the one who published his last book, I think it's called American Weightlifting or whatever it's called. I sadly have not had a chance to really look through it closely yet. But so I completely respect what he was doing there, and I get it. I get the urge, the compulsion to do that, and it makes sense in a lot of ways. But my thoughts on the whole like national system issue is that there's largely no point in trying to look at it that way for a lot of reasons. So much of what we see as like a system for a certain country is based entirely on who the athletes are that they're working with, right? So, this is true for technical models too. It's like, well, there is really no Chinese weightlifting. It is the fact that they are doing weightlifting and they are Chinese. And it's not like if you, it's one of those maddening things where I watch content come out like, this is a Chinese method. It's like, well, it's weird. It's the exact same thing that you can find in my book from 2008. And I had never seen a Chinese lifter, like in person, or seen any Chinese literature at that time, because there wasn't any in English. And I'm not trying to like beat up on that stuff, but it's like when you really break that stuff down, that's not how it works, right? It's more representative of the fact that, hey, Chinese weightlifting looks a certain way because Chinese weightlifters overwhelmingly are long torsoed, short limbed, right? Whereas European weightlifters tend to be, more mesomorphic or even potentially very long limbed and short torsoed. So the most fundamental technical things are identical, but how they are manifest practically look different because of those proportions and things like that. And there's just different kind of traditions on how you train, things like that. So you come to an American system specifically, and you can't have an American system because we do not have a centrally controlling national program. Mm-hmm. And we're Americans. We are like constitutionally averse to something like that. Like if USA Weightlifting came down and said, hey, all USA weightlifting coaches, you now have to teach and coach according to the USA Weightlifting official manual, there would be an absolute riot, right? Like the headquarters would get burned down. No one here is going to do that. I honestly don't even know a single coach in USA Weightlifting, and granted, I don't know every coach in USA Weightlifting, but that actually like uses the USA Weightlifting manuals, right? They might use them kind of initially to get an idea of what they're doing when they're brand new, but like people don't rely on that stuff. And so you're never going to have an American system. And that's why I always laugh when people are like, oh, American weightlifting is such and such. It's like, based on what? Like where have you been involved in American weightlifting? And because what you're saying is completely inaccurate. Like maybe you talk to one American weightlifting coach who does things that way. And now you say that's American weightlifting. You can't apply that logic the same way you can maybe say like, well, this is Russian weightlifting and this is Chinese weightlifting, because you do have that kind of centralized sort of system and the long history of kind of conventional approaches to things. So I guess my point is you can't have an American system truly, other than describing it as this totally decentralized system where everybody gets to do whatever they want, however they want. So what I guess what I would say is my sense of the American system is we want to do whatever works best. And that's my personal coaching philosophy is I don't care where it comes from. I don't care what it's called. I don't care who invented it. If this is what works best for this given athlete, this is what I'm going to do. And to me, if you have any system that's more rigid than that, you're holding yourself back and you're holding your athletes back.
I think that's a great way to put that. I mean, really, it all comes down to like, what is the, like, all of those systems really only existed because they had a state-sponsored program. And more than that, it was that because there was an exclusion of any other kind of training, right? Like, it was like, we have this one way, and because of that, this is the only way that we do this,
Well, and think about it too. In a program like that, you can say, you athletes need to conform to my system, because if it doesn't work for you, we have other people to replace you. Mm-hmm. Right? So like classic Bulgaria, you start with 3,000 lifters, you whittle them down to a national team of 10. So guess what? 2,990, you're not good enough. You don't work with this system for whatever reason. Bye. We don't need you. So it's not necessarily that the system was perfect. It's that the circumstances allowed that system to be forcefully applied. And again, China, think of the depth of talent they have, where if someone isn't good enough and doesn't fit with that system, it doesn't matter because they don't need that person. America is the opposite. We are literally on street corners begging for people to come do weightlifting. And so we have to adapt our methods to suit each athlete rather than demanding each athlete adapt to our methods. And so I guess I would say that's the better way to put the American system, is that we have to make it work for every athlete that we get rather than just demanding they work around us. And I think that makes better coaches. Because you have to experiment, you have to learn, you have to be willing to change the way you approach things from a programming standpoint, from a technique standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, from the way you describe things, everything. You have to find ways to make it work better for each new athlete who comes through your door, if you want to get them as good as possible. If you want to be a stubborn, mule of a coach and it's like, nope, this is my way. If you don't like it, get out. You're probably not going to be successful unless you have someone like Olivia Reeves happen to walk through your door.
That is, I mean, a fantastic point. Really, I think, and I've noticed this too in the trend in weightlifting. It seems like now more than ever, there are more people entering the sport of weightlifting without doing the sport. Like, they're finding the snatch and clean and jerk from a video I post on TikTok or on Instagram, and they're like, that's cool, I want to do that. But they don't compete, and they're not really interested in necessarily the sport aspect of it, at least not at first. And that maybe is kind of what the system is like getting people, finding ways to get more people to do snatch and clean and jerk in ways that don't necessarily have to be the sport, as a way to get them into the sport.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to have... You look at, something like baseball, right? I don't know why I always use baseball as an analogy, probably because I wanted to be a good baseball player when I was a young lad. But you have the Major League Baseball is a tiny fraction of the total number of American men who have played baseball in their lives, right? It is the best of the best. But the way you get there is you have this massive recreational level system, right? Where every American boy growing up at some point probably has played at least T-ball or Little League or something like that. So you have basically blanket exposure to the sport at some level in some way. Plus you have it as a sport that so many people want to watch. So you have this, like, again, universal familiarity with it. People who don't even know anything about baseball still know about baseball, right? You can't say the same about Olympic weightlifting. People who don't know what Olympic weightlifting is truly have zero idea, right? If you pull someone off the street like, hey, tell me how baseball works, they can probably describe it close enough, right? Say, hey, what's Olympic weightlifting? They're like, I don't know. You put a Speedo on and you oil yourself up and you pose. Like it's zero understanding, recognition. And so that's what you have to have. And that has been the best thing that CrossFit did for the sport of weightlifting, is just start building that foundation of recognition, familiarity, and accessibility.
I talk about that. We're opening up a gym here soon in St. Louis, and there's one other weightlifting gym in St. Louis. They got about 100 members or so. I'm like, well, there's 3 million people in this city.
Yeah.
I guarantee we can convince some other ones of them to do weightlifting, but they do not know it yet. They have no clue what it is. But how do I get this in front of them and show them like that they like weightlifting? How do I interrupt them somehow? It's like crazy.
TikTok. You gotta do more dances with your friends or something.
Back to there, doesn't it? The social media, the darn social media.
Yep.
Speaking of CrossFit, this is probably a good last question here. Speaking of CrossFit, that was probably responsible for the influx of especially women into the sport of weightlifting, in my opinion. That's where I kind of see it seemed like that was the trajectory point change there. And now, we're talking to somebody at USA Weightlifting, and they're saying that there's almost the membership has almost flipped to where it's now about like 55% women and 45% men, whereas just a few years ago it was like 70-30.
Yeah.
And from the outside, it seems like you coach mostly women. Why do you think that is? Like, what are the differences that you've noticed on the big scale that lead to either you preferring to coach them or the, I guess, just growth of females competing in the sport of weightlifting?
Well, I mean, I would say those two things are totally unrelated in my case. I do coach overwhelmingly women. I mean, early on, it was a pretty balanced mix of men and women. And then over time, it just kind of organically went that way. And I think there were a number of factors to it. One, I was publicly successful coaching women, which means more women are drawn to the program and me as a coach. Back then when I started, there were not many coaches, I think, who coached women well. And like shockingly so, like they could not figure out how to do it. Like they were like the different species of animal. It was very strange to me. I was like, it's not that hard. And I was like, well, how do you coach female athletes? Like, you mean athletes? Like, it's the same way you coach everybody else. You approach them as individuals, and you, again, like I was talking about earlier, you adjust your approach based on what that individual needs, and you don't make stupid assumptions about somebody that you don't know. So that was part of what kind of how I started going that direction. I just had more success. I found it was, I just have found it generally easier to work with women for any manner of reasons, but like, there's typically less ego. There's typically less need for persuasion on my end. And the way I joke about it, and this is kind of unfair because I have coached a lot of men who are not like this at all, but with a lot of the male weightlifters I worked with in the past, it was like I would have to convince them to do something like they were doing me a favor completing their workout or something. Whereas women, it's almost like I have to physically peel them off a barbell so they don't actually kill themselves trying to do something. And so it's just a lot of little things like that. For whatever reason, I just kind of work better with them. Regarding the shift in kind of demographics in the sport, though, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that, you know, obviously historically there has been a dearth of athletic opportunities for women, right? It is, athletics has just historically been a male dominated thing. And whether that is with the actual practical aspects like availability and accessibility to programs, or just kind of the cultural thing where there's just this expectation that athletes are men. You know, even in the language, right? It's like, well, there's athletes and then there's female athletes. Well, even just the way people talk about that, like that right there shows that of the way people think about athletics, right? And I don't mean to get into some big gender role thing, but like that's just a fact, right? Um, and so I think when CrossFit came along very early on, a lot of the popular CrossFit athletes were women. That is what was being shown in the early CrossFit social media stuff. And I don't think that was an accident, you know, from a marketing perspective, because there were a lot of really good CrossFit men at that time who weren't getting as much airtime, so to speak. So again, I don't think that was an accident, but I do think that was an influence right there, is women who had that athletic drive, who needed an outlet, saw that and went, hey, here's something I can do. And it seems normal, right? It wasn't weird to see an athletic woman with like capped out delts and a bicep vein. That was an athlete. That was a CrossFitter. That was a weightlifter, whatever. That was just normal. And so I think it just created this new acceptable avenue for a bunch of women who needed something like that to be drawn to. And then weightlifting was just kind of the natural offshoot of that. And so I think what you see a lot of times is CrossFit is like the big end of the funnel. And then a lot of people get into it. They love CrossFit itself. That's what they do for the rest of their lives, and they're happy with that. But there's definitely a significant part of that demo that wants something more specific. They want to go beyond the CrossFit and get into whether it's weightlifting, powerlifting, or, you know, these days it's stuff like high rocks or, you know, whatever. They get channeled into something like that. And so weightlifting was right there, like ready at that time. You know, women had just been added to the Olympics in weightlifting in 2000. CrossFit just came into kind of public notice in very early 2000s. So it was just kind of the confluence of a lot of different things, I think. And I think weightlifting as a whole has been very welcoming to women in the sport, whereas a lot of other sports are not so much. And obviously there are holdouts, and like my all-time favorite experience was going to a clinic with Ivan Abadjev, the Bulgarian coach. This was only a couple years before he died. And this woman there raised her hand and asked him something about, you know, how would you approach coaching women differently than men? And of course, Alex Kraichev is translating for him. So Abadjev, blah, 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 something in Bulgarian. And Kraichev, you can see his face like, oh God, I don't want to translate this. And he goes, well, the first question you have to ask is, should women be weightlifters? And I was like, oh man. And you know, it was like partly tongue in cheek, but it was 95% serious. And so, you know, again, there are holdouts with regard to women weightlifters, and there's always going to be people who are just contrarian dickheads about anything. But I think it's just more so than a lot of other sports has been more welcoming to female participation.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for real this time, and then we'll let you go. You've helped probably more weightlifters PR than anybody else. You put out more free education, free programs, free questions and answers. 20 years later, what do you still feel like you have left to do in the sport?
Well, I mean, the good thing is that I don't feel like I have a need to do any of the things I'm about to say. In other words, like I could retire from coaching right now and I think be adequately content with what I've achieved. Because to me, the more important thing is helping more people do what they want to do rather than like the traditional metrics. Like, I want to have an Olympic gold medalist. Would I like to have an Olympic gold medalist? Of course. Any coach wants that. Like, that would be great. It doesn't get any more prestigious than that. But I maybe very early on in my coaching career, that was something I thought about and wanted, but that's not something that really drives me at this point. Like, it's not something like I can live without it. I don't. It would be great to have a world champion. It would be great to have a world record holder, an Olympic medalist, whatever. So if I'm able to achieve that before I retire, I'd be very happy. But I don't need those things. So I think what's left for me is more continuing to find better ways to access more people and convince them to listen to reason rather than the flashy, shiny new thing on TikTok or Instagram that is actually not helping them. And so maybe I would say that's actually way less of a reasonable goal than an Olympic gold medalist, is to basically change everyone's mind about how they use social media and how they interpret what's going on. But to me, that's kind of more important, is to kind of continue being, I guess, a voice of reason and reliably, consistently putting out what I believe to be quality, valuable, helpful information, rather than kind of succumbing to the pressure to just put out content that is popular, because the two are absolutely not the same thing, almost completely unrelated.
I mean, fantastic answer, dude. I thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Where can people find out more about what you've got going on?
CatalystAthletics.com will have every single thing related to weightlifting on it. That's a massive free exercise library, a few hundred articles, hundreds of videos. It'll have links to all my social media stuff, but mainly on social media. YouTube is just at Catalyst Athletics. Instagram is at Catalyst Athletics. I'm on TikTok, but all I do is repost my Instagram stuff on there and then don't ever look at it again. So if you're looking for any kind of interaction, Instagram and YouTube are the way to go. You can find everything from there.
And also make sure to check out his books too, guys. Tough and Olympic Weightlifting Guide for athletes and coaches. We'll link those down in the description below if you guys want to pick those up. Calvin, where can people find you?
At Calvin Lackey, 81 kg on everything.
And you guys can find me at Big Ben Strength on everything. We'll catch you guys next week. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
If you found this video helpful, then make sure to check out this video here, or this episode of the Last Set, Best Set podcast.